Back to work. A county clerk questions the validity of marriage licenses issued in her absence. Dissident voices. Pope Francis asked to address the stifling of Cuba's political opposition. Destructive inferno. Loss of life and hundreds of homes to raging Northern California fires. And setting the table. A look at the finishing touches to the altar for DC's canonization mass. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, September 14th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. A county clerk in Kentucky finally returns to work today after a stint in jail for contempt of court. Susanne LaFrankie is on Capitol Hill tonight with more on this divisive battle for religious liberty. Susanne?
Brian, Kim Davis says she still will not issue marriage licenses to gay couples, but she will not stop deputy clerks who do. As you can imagine, there was strong reaction from Kentucky to lawmakers here in Washington. An emotional Kim Davis insists she just wants to work without violating her conscience.
I don't want to have this conflict. I don't want to be in the spotlight, and I certainly don't want to be a whipping post.
Davis says she won't interfere with same-sex marriage licenses, but they would not have her name on them either. Republican presidential candidate Rick Santorum weighed in.
I would advise Kim Davis to follow her conscience. The Supreme Court decision had really made no provision as to what county clerk should do.
But a deputy clerk continued issuing marriage licenses today. Davis became a hero to many conservative Christians when she refused to issue licenses, citing her Christian faith after the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. She was found in contempt, jailed for 5 nights, and finally released. Meanwhile, a pro-gay marriage organization erected this billboard in Davis's hometown, ridiculing her beliefs. But religious liberty advocates say the Kentucky legislature should create accommodations for clerks like Davis.
In Kentucky today, if you're a vegetarian, you do not have to issue fishing and gaming licenses. If you're against hunting, your conscience is respected. The same thing should apply for people of religious conscience, especially when it comes to something so foundational as marriage.
Davis's attorney says he is going to file yet another lawsuit against the governor of Kentucky. That will happen later this week. Meanwhile, lawmakers here on Capitol Hill say with the Supreme Court's ruling, it's now up to individual states to pass laws to protect people's religious liberties. Brian?
Susanne LaFrankie, thank you. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. After a college professor is killed in his office, police have questions for another school employee. Investigators in Cleveland, Mississippi say they are looking for Shannon Lamb, who also works at Delta State University. They believe he may know more about today's shooting of history professor Ethan Schmidt. Police say the shooting may be connected with another recent killing. Delta State went on lockdown just before 11 o'clock this morning after reports of an active shooter. Well, 2 straight days of attacks mark the Jewish New Year in Jerusalem at the city's most sensitive holy site. This compound, revered by both Jews and Muslims, is a frequent flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Palestinian protesters threw rocks at Israeli police who entered the area to ensure security. A 64-year-old Israeli man died and 2 passengers in the car were hurt when attackers stoned their car. Israel's prime minister will hold an emergency meeting tomorrow night, just as the Jewish New Year celebration ends. Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott is removed from office. Ruling Conservatives ousted Abbott as party leader when a former minister challenged him. Abbott will be replaced by former party leader Malcolm Turnbull. The change could signal a different Australian response to climate change and other issues, including marriage. Abbott had survived a previous leadership challenge during February. A new poll shows Donald Trump and Ben Carson lead the crowded field of GOP presidential contenders. The Washington Post ABC News poll shows Trump with 33% support among Republicans and Republican-leaning or leaning independents. Carson comes in second with 20%. The same poll shows Hillary Clinton losing ground in the Democratic race over the past couple of months. She's still in the lead, but her support has dropped below 50%. A teachers' strike in Seattle enters its second week today. Teachers walked out on the first day of school last week when negotiations broke down. Seattle Public Schools and the Teachers Union remain far apart on key issues. We're told those issues include teacher evaluations, length of the school day, and pay.
I think the school district and the school board need to see the support that we have and that we're serious. 5-6 years with no cost of living increase. The legislature needs to see that we're serious and fund education properly.
So the strike continues, and some community centers are offering free daycare as working parents scramble for childcare. Michigan's ACLU demands a Catholic hospital perform a sterilization. Of course, that would violate church teaching. That group says a pregnant woman with a brain tumor was denied a tubal ligation procedure. The woman's doctor recommends she have no more children due to the strain of pregnancy on her health. The hospital is part of Ascension Health, that is the largest Catholic healthcare system in the country. It is governed by the ethical and religious directives. They are written by the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. A bill allowing terminally ill patients to legally take their own lives now goes to California Governor Jerry Brown. That bill passed the state Senate 2315 Friday after an emotional debate on the last day of a special legislative session. The bill requires patients to be able to take the life-ending medication themselves. 2 doctors have to approve. The patient must submit several written requests, and there must be 2 witnesses. Opponents say the measure could actually encourage suicide. Aaron Karyadi is joining us by Skype from Orange, California. He's the Director of Medical Ethics Program for the University of California Irvine School of Medicine. So there seemed to be a lot of opposition to this bill in California. How did it get through so quickly? It seemed like it went under the radar.
It did fly under the radar. The bill actually died in the regular legislative session. It encountered bipartisan opposition in the Assembly Health Committee. And then the governor called a special session to deal, ironically, with health care financing, specifically how we're going to finance Medicaid in California. And proponents of the bill used that as an opportunity to reintroduce it now rather than as a Senate bill, as an Assembly bill. It got a lot less attention because it was occurring in this unusual context. They were able to stack the committees with proponents of the law so that it sailed through committee rather quickly without the usual sort of policy debate and scrutiny that a bill like this would ordinarily require.
And I understand the governor didn't want this taken up during the special session. Has Brown given any indication whether he will sign this or veto it?
Well, Governor Brown very rarely speaks on any legislation before it comes to his desk, while it's still in the process of being debated in the legislature. But he did take an unusual step in this case. He made one public statement saying that he didn't think that this special legislative session that was supposed to be for the purpose of dealing with healthcare financing in California was the right setting in which to do something like this, that this was not the right way to give it due deliberation and public debate. That's the only thing that he's said about this bill. So everything else in terms of whether he will sign or whether he'll veto is really a matter of speculation.
Aaron, aside from the obvious moral implications, what are the problems with this bill?
Well, the problems with the bill are many, and I'll mention just a few. There are totally inadequate safeguards to protect vulnerable populations in this bill. As soon as this so-called option is introduced, it immediately becomes the cheapest and most expedient way of dealing with complicated and often expensive situations at the end of life. I think this is why the bill encountered bipartisan opposition in the regular legislative session, not only from Republicans, but also from Democrats representing poorer districts, representing districts with primarily Latino constituents.
All right, Aaron Karyadi joining us by Skype from Orange, California. Thank you, Aaron. And one of 2 major wildfires burning in Northern California takes a human toll now. The Valley Fire has destroyed more than 400 homes, forcing thousands out of their homes. Catherine Zeltner reports.
A state of emergency in place across 4 California counties this morning.
You gotta come right now.
The massive Valley wildfire spreading rapidly, killing at least 1 person in its path.
These fires are burning in all directions. The plume of smoke is creating its own weather, and so they're very unpredictable.
The raging flames burning over 50,000 acres 100 miles west of Sacramento. Fire so hot it melted the window pane right out of this car. 4 of the nearly 1,500 firefighters battling the flames suffered burn injuries by the fast-moving blaze.
The firefighters there, I'm sure they're emotionally drained, physically drained after being stuck in a situation where, your life's on the line.
Just 70 miles east of Sacramento, another wildfire has grown to more than 65,000 acres, threatening over 6,000 structures. Officials forcing thousands of people to evacuate.
I slept here in the parking lot at Walmart in my car.
Together, the fires have already destroyed around 500 homes.
Everybody's houses are burning up. It's awful.
Really scared. Very, very worried about if we even have a home to go to anymore.
Here at the Napa Valley County Fairgrounds,
this is my new home.
Nearly 1,000 evacuees pitched tents, nervously awaiting the news of the fate of their home.
My house was completely destroyed. It is flat to the ground. We lost everything.
Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. And a group of peaceful protesters in Cuba asked for a meeting with Pope Francis when he visits the island this weekend. Members of the Ladies in White and others are calling for the Pope to urge the Cuban government to free political prisoners. The Ladies in White have marched along Havana's Fifth Avenue since the group's founding in 2003. Originally protesting the arrests of their husbands who have since been released, they continue to march for the release of all political prisoners.
We also hope that the Pope hears not only the Cuban regime, but also hears from people who are urging to be heard, who are in need, in this case, the Ladies in White. The Ladies in White requested months ago that when the Pope arrives in Cuba, for him to be able to have an audience with us for 1 minute. And up to now, we've had no response.
Meanwhile, the Cuban government plans to release about 3,500 prisoners ahead of the papal visit. We have Frank Calzone with us with the Center for a Free Cuba. And this makes Raul Castro look good before the world, before the Pope's visit. He's releasing these prisoners. But who is being released and who's not?
Well, this is part of a propaganda war of the Cuban government. The prisoners released are what they call common prisoners. Thieves, people who have committed some crimes. But folks who are in prison for speaking up or for calling the government to release other prisoners or to allow Cubans to meet or to speak freely, those remain in prison.
And those are the ones I know that you have been advocating to get released along with the Ladies in White. Now, Francis gave an interesting interview to a friend from Argentina, and he said that he acknowledges that some people are using him for their own agenda. Is Raul Castro doing that?
Well, I'm sure the Pope knows very well what the game is. The Cuban government wants to present a good image to the world while continue to repress the Cuban people. I hope that the Pope will speak in Cuba not only about the prisoners, but about the issue of abortion, for example. Cuba has a very high rate of abortion, while a very low rate of infant mortality rate. And they get that low infant mortality rate by aborting all babies that are sick or whatever. And that's a gimmick, again, to try to present a false idea of what Cuba is all about.
So, aside from speaking out like this, what would it take to make the Pope's visit to Cuba really good for the Cuban people?
Well, the Pope's visit to Cuba is good for the Cuban people because hundreds of thousands of Cubans are going to get together to hear the Pope. I'm sure the Pope will have a message of hope. I am sure the Pope will, at some point, tell the Cuban people that they ought to determine their own destiny, like the Polish Pope did. I do hope that the Pope reminds the Cubans not to be afraid, like the Polish Pope did. The Argentinian Pope knows what it is to live under the dictatorship in Argentina, and he ought to bear witness to the suffering of the Cuban people.
Well, it will only be a few days, and we'll see what he actually says. From the Center for a Free Cuba, Frank Calzone, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, we hear from a Portuguese journalist who interviewed Pope Francis one-on-one. And South Africa celebrates the beatification of its first martyr. Today, September 14th, is the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross. In the 4th century, 3 crosses were found at the site of Christ's tomb. Church tradition tells us the true cross was identified when its touch healed a dying woman. May the Holy Cross bless all of us today. I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for joining us on this Monday. And Pope Francis calls the current refugee crisis in Europe just the tip of an iceberg. During an interview with Portugal Radio's Aaron Miguel, Francis says the underlying cause is a bad, unjust socio-economic system. He says the world must work to help people not feel the need to emigrate. The Pope admits welcoming refugees is not a riskless proposition. The interview aired today, and Wyatt Goolsbee spoke earlier with the journalist who interviewed the Holy Father.
We're joined now by Aaron Miguel, a veteran Portuguese journalist who covers the Vatican. Aaron, you recently sat down with Pope Francis in a one-on-one interview that will air today on Portuguese radio. What are some of the highlights?
Well, of course, we speak about the refugees, the Europe, the crisis of faith, and the opportunity of this talk was that in Rome, where the bishops from Portugal had Limina visit, we also speak about his vocation as successor of Peter.
That does sound like a whole variety of topics. What was Francis like in person? Is he in good spirits?
Well, when he entered the room, I had this impression that he was very tired. I began to imagine the deep problems he had to face every day. But then, as we were talking, he just became more easygoing and lots of sense of humor, and then it was as we meet him in the plane, very attentive, very serene, very prescriptive at the same time, and like a father, I would say.
Sure, and it's nice to hear how he kind of warmed up to you. He has 2 big trips ahead of him. How do you think Pope Francis copes with such a fast-paced schedule?
I think he had no strength. I think it's the grace of the Lord that gives him the strength. He himself said this several times during the flights when everybody's very tired, and Father Lombardi asked him, how is this mysterious that you are always in good shape and we are completely tired? And he said, I think it's the grace of state. I mean, it's the Lord that gives him the strength.
And it's pretty incredible how a man in his late 70s can move around so quickly and, like you say, be in good spirits. You in particular are an expert on Fatima, and the Pope, of course, has a great devotion to Our Lady. Did you talk about the apparitions?
Of course we did, and we are always praying for his coming to Fatima on the 100th anniversary of the apparitions in 2017. So I asked him, and he said, well, there's 2 occasions important in 2017, is the Aparecida, 300 years, and Fatima. So, and I told him it's like a stereophonic occasion, so he was laughing, and he said he wished to come. So we are really hoping that he will come.
And of course, it's nice to hear how Pope Francis relies so much on prayer. Aaron Miguel, veteran journalist, joining us from Rome tonight. Aaron, thanks so much.
Thank you.
What a beautiful way to get closer to our Holy Father, talking with someone who actually talked with him. Assisi will again host an international event to open dialogue between believers and non-believers. A new edition of the Courtyard of the Gentiles initiative was announced today at the Vatican. The city of St. Francis hosts roundtables, workshops, and concerts next week. That name comes from the area of Jerusalem's ancient temple where people of all cultures, languages, and beliefs gathered. And thousands of South Africans flocked to a small village in that country's northern Limpopo province for Sunday's beatification ceremony of Samuel Benedict Daswa. He was a school teacher who was beaten to death 25 years ago for objecting to the use of witchcraft. The South African deputy president called for an end to these ritual killings.
May this day be the day when we say ritual killings must come to an end.
Only recently has Pope Francis directed these ceremonies be held at the place where the person beatified lived and died. Daswa is the first South African beatified martyr. Pope Francis is calling on the faithful to follow the example of Daswa. During his Sunday Angelus, the Holy Father upheld Daswa for courageously defending Christian views and rejecting worldly and pagan customs. His testimony, the Pope added, helps families spread the truth and charity of Christ. Up next, water from the Rio Grande River is blessed at the Vatican and brought to the U.S. And the altar created for the Pope's National Shrine Mass nears completion. God loves the lowly. When we live humbly, He takes our small efforts and creates great things. A tweet from Pope Francis today ahead of his trip to Cuba and then the United States. Thanks so much for joining us on this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Father Jack Wall is Skyping with us from Chicago tonight. Father, the last time we talked, you were in Rome. Tell us about the vials of water that you brought back from Rome to Chicago.
Well, Brian, we just recently hosted 47 young Hispanic lay leaders in 47 dioceses in the United States. They're serving some of the poorest communities of Hispanics in the United States. And we bring them together once a year to just to build up that sense of solidarity with one another, and so that they can really learn from each other. But they are literally touching the lives of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Hispanics. And we wanted to come up with a symbol that expressed their unity to the Holy Father. The Holy Father is coming to the United States, but won't be able to go to the poorest areas. And we were looking for some symbol to express their unity with him. And so we had him and Cardinal Parolin in the Secretary of State's office bless holy water that comes from the Rio Grande River to express his solidarity with the poorest people of the United States in those most marginal communities. And the communities along the Rio Grande are some of the poorest communities in the United States.
What a beautiful symbol. Tell us how Hispanics connect with this Holy Father. There certainly must be a special bond.
Well, clearly, being from Latin America himself, he certainly has a greater sensitivity to the Latin American communities throughout the world, and particularly those that have been moving north. And in a very particular way, he has called to all of us as American Catholics and throughout the world and the developed world to reach out to the margins, to go to the peripheries of our society and be in solidarity with the poorest communities in the United States for us. And those communities are very Catholic communities. So as Catholics, it's very important for us to be in solidarity with each other.
And the Holy Father will be offering many of his masses and talks in Spanish. I'm sure that will help that connection.
I'm sure it will. And it's really for all of us. You know, we are a United States, and it's a powerful thing to have him come to visit with us and to be able to show our solidarity with each other in the many ethnic communities.
All right, Father Jack Wall joining us from Chicago. Thank you, Father.
You're very welcome.
And when Pope Francis arrives here in D.C. in 8 days, our team is with him every step of the way. At the National Shrine, he'll celebrate the first ever canonization on U.S. soil. Jason Calvi is there tonight, reporting on the finishing touches to the Pope's altar.
When Pope Benedict visited the National Shrine back in 2008, he made a visit right here to an image of Our Lady from his homeland in Germany. And if you walk past this image and past the marble walls, you notice work being done on the visit of Pope Francis right here. The Catholic University students who came up with the plans are impressed.
Wow.
Next Wednesday, Pope Francis will use this altar during the outdoor canonization of Junipero Serra. Afterward, it will become the main altar inside.
It needs to match the walls here.
The basilica's travertine marble walls.
See, that blends very nicely.
While the Pope's altar matches the real marble of the basilica, it's actually wood.
I hope he feels it's the real thing.
David Francis Donor is using a technique called faux painting.
We put this on with a very tight mat roller.
In his toolbox is styrofoam.
And you kind of move it a little bit to give it that veining.
And erasers.
Sort of give it that kind of a crevice that's in the stone.
They'll put 10 coats on, transforming wood into the Pope's marble-looking altar.
It's just amazing. It's a great honor to be here. It's unbelievable.
At the National Shrine, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. A beautiful piece of art. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. I'll be with you tomorrow morning on Morning Glory on EWTN Radio. For our EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.